Hey everybody, this is Alec.
I'm Ben.
And this is Cinema A to B with Alec and Ben, hence the A to B. So, that's how it works.
If
really
nobody understood that, really
if you
insightful.
didn't get it. So today we're going to be talking about the Lord of the Rings of Power TV show. So we just don't talk about movies. We also talk about TV shows because, well, we're kind of in the golden age of TV right now where it's just blowing up with that's where some of the best quality, best stories. I mean, you got a lot of high level A people who are starting to do this stuff. So we can't kind of ignore it anymore.
Right. In reality, these series on HBO and the other streaming services, Netflix, these are just 10-part movies.
Yeah.
These don't look like television of old at all. So we have no problem. I have no problem dubbing this stuff cinema.
No, not at all. So Lord of the Rings of Power. And I know both of us are pretty big Lord of the Rings movie fans as well as have read the books. So I haven't gotten too deep on the other books. So outside of The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings trilogy, I didn't read much of the others. So I've kind of done the synopsis of most of them before I started watching a lot of these stuff. But So Ben, if you want to start us off, what'd you think of the show?
So flawed, heavily flawed. Not the first season that I think they wanted, especially the fan reaction. But it's still good. It just wastes its first 4 episodes. It moves it at a snail's pace for no other reason that they just didn't want to spill more plot. Is kind of my take on it. But visually, it's stunning. It looks, to me, it kind of has a visual style that sits in between Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings and in between the way the Hobbit movies look. So it feels pretty good the way they've shot it, and some of it seems a little too clean to me, especially compared to the movies, the original trilogy movies that kind of a lived-in look. It kind of lacks that sometimes. Things look a little too pristine, but it's still a show I enjoyed, and it got better as it went. But man, was that a slog. The first 3 or 4 episodes they lost a lot of audience, and frankly, for good reason.
Yeah. I'm pretty much the same, where the first couple episodes, I caught it not late, but I wasn't up to date. I wasn't watching it weekly. So I pretty much, I think, binged most of it in back-to-back episodes over the span of a few days. And definitely if I didn't have that, I would have been lax to kind of finish it. So again, I'm a big Lord of the Rings fan, the original trilogy. I'm not a Hobbit fan. I think there's a lot that's heavily flawed. Some good parts. Martin Freeman is amazing. I'll watch him as Bilbo all day long, but I think the problem is the rest of the stuff. But this kind of had the same thing. It was definitely very, very slow. They were doing, I think, a little too much world building that really didn't need to be there. And then there were some things they really didn't discuss that I felt like they did. Like for the longest time, the Southlands in the first few episodes, they don't talk about locations of where it's just the Southlands. And for me, that whole storyline, I had no problems with the Black Elf. I know that was a huge, big thing. Looking at the reviews and stuff, but that whole storyline just was boring to me. Like it just didn't pull me in. And then I think it was episode 3 when after they get captured and stuff. It was again, if you watch the first episode, spoiler light. So if you haven't seen it, you'll probably have some spoilers. But we're gonna try not to do the major ones. So if you can still kind of listen. But anyways, the capture. That's when I started to be like, oh, okay, I kind of care about these characters. But for the most part, I was 100% in just give me more of Galadriel's story, give me more of the Hobbit story. That's what I'm interested in.
The Harfoots.
Yeah, Harfoots. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm admittedly not a huge Harfoot fan.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But Galadriel's story, fine. As far as I'm concerned, they could have done the entire series with the dwarves, and I would have been happy. That to me, that was where they felt the strongest. the characters, the environment. That's where it, and frankly, the dynamic between, gosh, I'm spacing here, man. I'm spacing. Elrond.
Yeah.
Elrond and.
Oh,
this is bad.
This is bad. These are the things that we need to like look at beforehand. But quickly, I'm going to go.
It's been a minute. It's been a minute. We should have watched it again.
Yeah, I would have skipped halfway through. Oh man, Prince Durin. Prince Durin the Fourth. Yeah.
Yeah. So the relationship between Elrond and Durin is, to me, the most interesting of any of the characters in the show. They're mainly because the actors are really good, really good. And I would say by and large, the acting is solid across the entire series, even though they really went with unknowns everywhere. And I think they did it to keep because the budget was so crazy to begin with them buying the rights. I don't think they could afford A-list talent.
No. Well, I love that they kind of dealt with the life expectancy between like elves and the dwarves, and like how Elrond, they were very pronounced about in the other series that they kind of talked about, they don't really talk about that, of how they experience time differently. But kind of for Elrond was felt very much that, he and Durin just saw each other like, oh, hey, yeah, blah, blah.
But whereas Durin's 20 years?
Yeah. He's like, my entire life has happened since I last saw you.
Yes. Yeah.
And so I kind of liked that, that storyline, at least those story beats of being able to kind of discuss, like, how do these characters deal with this time difference of how they view time differently. So I really enjoyed that. But yeah, you're right. I totally forgot about the dwarves, and they were my favorite part, really. So, I mean, I'm a sucker for dwarves. Love Gimli in the first, set of, trilogy, and that's the Hobbit. I enjoy the dwarves part of it too, as well. Though it does, the last one gets a little crazy, but
now as far as the central kind of plot point of Rings of Power, which is where is Sauron?
Mm-hmm.
Who is Sauron? And I don't know how I feel about them teasing that. It seemed pretty obvious by about the third episode on who that was.
Mm-hmm.
But that was kind of the one thing that the showrunners did right to generate some buzz, even after they lost a bunch of audience, was the debates all over Reddit and other boards of who is Sauron.
Yeah.
Is he even around? And they had a couple main characters that felt like they could be Sauron.
Yeah.
Obviously, by the end, they don't set it up as a big shocker, which I appreciated. I felt like they respected the intelligence of the audience by not making this, it's, like a Scooby-Doo, off goes the mask, it's old man Withers. They didn't do that. They kind of spoon-fed you, but then would deviate now and again to try to convince you that it was somebody else. And I appreciated that. I thought that was fun. Yeah. And then I kind of enjoyed, in retrospect, how Sauron was duping everybody. And it didn't follow the book specifically. The Silmarillion, it did not, mainly because there's some rights issues, if I'm not mistaken, with how they could navigate that. And I don't think the diehards, the Lord of the Rings diehards, understood that, the limitations with where rights began and ended with when they acquired the rights from the Tolkien estate to make this series. They were kind of boxed in some ways on creatively how they had to do certain things. And it's really unfortunate that was the reality. And a lot of that has to do with them not wanting, they couldn't infringe on the original trilogy, on Jackson's trilogy. In fact, Jackson couldn't even consult because the lawyers basically told him, told Amazon they actually wanted to bring Jackson in to screen it and stuff. And they did. They reached out to him and said, "Hey, would you be interested?" And he was like, "Yeah." And then they had to ghost him.
Yeah.
Because the lawyers got involved and said, you can't bring him in. That's a New Line Cinema deal. It's a different rights to different parts of the Lord of the Rings realm, the world, events. So if understanding that, I think I can roll with some of the faults of the series, that it's some limitations it has, because they were kind of operating in a box.
And they're definitely not, Bezos didn't get his Game of Thrones killer, but what people forget is the first season of Game of Thrones really didn't hit right until like halfway through the latter third, and like you watch those first couple episodes, yeah, there's some cool stuff, but it's also slow because it's doing so much world building, which
right.
I do think this show really needed to rely on, even though obviously it's way in the past, they needed to rely on people having watched some of the Lord of the Rings or know something, and so didn't have to do as much world building here, and could have kind of paced those first couple episodes a little bit faster. Just give us like, we're in the past. I mean, like they did that whole little thing in the beginning. I felt like that was good. Like, just get us into the action, just get us into something interesting, and maybe even cut out an episode and make it an episode shorter. So that's the problem I get a lot with these TV series that are trying to be 10-hour movies, is like you're trying to hit 10 episodes or 13 or something like that, and you really don't have the story for it, so you got to do filler. I mean, that was, we always joked about Netflix bloat. I mean, everyone on the internet did. When Netflix started first putting out TV series, they required it to be 13 episodes, and so if you didn't have that, you had to fill something, and it became, slog through a lot of crap because
and Rings of Power is 8 episodes.
Yeah.
The problem is they could have accomplished what transpires in probably 6.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it would have been tighter and better, and
and they wouldn't have lost the audience that they've lost. And I don't know how they're going to get them back. I mean, the audience is, I think it's like 9 million versus like 54 million. And I don't know if that's streaming hours, or I'd have to look it up, but it's either streaming hours or some sort of audience measurement that they just released for streaming shows. Stranger Things was numero uno.
Yeah.
And it's like 5 times the audience that Rings of Power had. And the list, by the way, is absolutely dominated by Netflix, which is no surprise.
Yeah.
But yeah, they could have done what they did in Rings of Power in the first season in probably 6 episodes, and it would have worked better. But that's easy for me to sit here and say, with hindsight.
Well, and also I think, looking at it, it looks like they just released 1 episode, and like the first episode, and then did it from week to week.
Okay.
I mean, I didn't watch it. Like, there was so many other stuff going on that I was just like, I'd let it sit and I'd catch up to it.
Yeah.
So I started watching them back to back, which was helpful, and I think that's helpful for any show because you can easily kind of forget about a really bad episode.
Yeah, and if it's released, if it's a full drop, where you're not having to wait on weekly drops,
then
you should go ahead and binge it.
Yeah, but you lose a little bit of that conversation like that you would have had of like who's Sauron, those kind of things. But I think that what they needed to do, much like Apple TV Plus or Disney Plus have done with newer shows, where they drop 2 or 3 episodes immediately. Like I have to say, like you, and we'll get to it. We're going to definitely talk about a different thing, but I felt, for me, when Andor dropped, I watched all 3 episods back to back, and
that's what Disney wanted you to do. And like and there's a good reason for it too. But yeah, that is for sure a series. In fact, that's the most exciting thing I want to talk about from 2022.
Yeah,
with 100%. You is Andor. So we'll totally tease that. But Rings of Power did go on a weekly drop, just like an HBO series. Yeah. Now you have the opportunity to binge it, but
I think would have helped having the first 2 or 3 episodes dropped at the same time,
Yes.
so you can kind of slog through some of that, and not have a whole week of, man, this was a terrible episode, let me get to episode 2, and then you have a whole nother week of thinking episode 2 is really slow, then 3,
Right.
Whereas you can binge one through episodes 1 through 3 if they're slow. If I remember correctly, 4 is kind of where I started to peak up a little more interest, and was like, so you'd only have 1 week of this, rough, and then you could still have 8.
Right, which is it catching fire more or less for what it is, it kind of hitting its stride at episode 3 or 4. That's a pretty common theme with these series.
Yeah.
That's pretty much, they have to lay a lot of groundwork over 2 or 3 episodes before they give you your first big payoff.
Yeah.
Some of these shows are easier to get through the first 2 or 3 episodes than others. Unfortunately, not everybody's constructed like a first season of Stranger Things where it just comes out of the gate, just crushing it from the first episode on. If I recall, the first episode of Game of Thrones was okay, but it wasn't awe-inspiring. No. I mean, other than that intro.
The intro was great, and then it was just boo.
And if I'm not mistaken, they've just revealed that the original pilot for Game of Thrones was a dumpster fire.
Oh yeah.
Total dumpster fire. And I forget who it was came in, and they basically had to reshoot almost the entire thing, ditched some cast, hired others. Yeah. It was a mess. Yeah. So I think a lot of this is perspective and giving some grace here on how hard these shows are to make.
Yeah. So, and you're also, how many fantasy series came out this year as well? I mean, that's been the whole new thing. Everyone's looking for kind of that Game of Thrones. You had the end of 2021, you had the Wheel of Time series. Obviously, you had House of Dragons this year as well that you're competing with. You had Willow coming out after Rings of Power, and then you had the Witcher series, Origin Stories coming out. They're all trying to,
one of these catches fire, which was the original Game of Thrones, and they, even though it ended poorly, the suits in the studios go, holy smokes, we have to. This is something we need to cash in on, and so all these fantasy series get greenlit all this at the same time.
Yeah,
it would be the same as if you saw a Western series just blow up for 5 or 6 seasons.
Yeah,
you would see around season 5 or 6, another 3 of these things go into production. So
I'm so glad that Western series did not blow up. My goodness. That is a genre that I am just not interested in. But it peaked in the 50s and 60s and some into the 70s. And then you get some gems like Tombstone. But generally speaking, that's not a genre that's blowing up anytime soon. But back to the Rings of Power. Yeah, sorry,
No, it's all good.
For the most part, I'd say. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say for the most part, like we talked about, like a lot of no-name actors. I was actually overall impressed by most of the quality of the acting. There were a couple characters, a couple people who I was not happy with. I don't think they were terrible, but it definitely were not great. And I was kind of, it was like pulling teeth for me of just watching them like just chew through the script and just not hit the beats right, or I'm not getting the emotional response I want. And there's a couple people that have been in other shows that I've seen. I haven't really liked them in those shows, so I'm coming into seeing them in this with already some preconceived notions of not really enjoying their performances. But but I do the definitely the guy who played Durin. Oh my goodness, Owain Arthur. He was fantastic, like absolutely fantastic. Like you said, the guy who played Elrond was also really good. I even really liked Robert
Aramayo played Elrond. Yeah, he's excellent. The actor that plays Arondir is good.
Yeah.
Ishmael Cruz Cordova. He's got great screen presence.
He does. He did seem, so for me, it was very kind of one emotional track for the entire. Well, like it's not. He didn't really kind of go the range, and so
no. He's an elf soldier, so like I think they've written in really narrow range for him in season 1. Yeah. I would expect to see more emotion from him in subsequent seasons. But the camera likes the guy. I mean, he's got a good screen presence to him. I could see him doing well in things outside of this show. Yeah, frankly. And what was cool is he was a Lord of the Rings fan since he was a little kid.
Oh, that's awesome.
And he'd always wanted to play an elf. So it was like, why not? No, I thought he was good. I think he was limited by how the character was written. Yeah. And I would actually say that that's true of Galadriel as well. But see, because I actually think she's a good actress, but the character's super one-dimensional until kind of the very end of the first season. And that's kind of the case with a lot of these. They're just, the writing was kind of lacking in some ways. The dialogue's not bad.
No.
But the character arcs weren't great for the most part. Other than Elrond's arc was good, Durin's arc was good, Durin's wife's arc was good.
Oh yeah, she was fantastic.
Yeah, she's really good.
Oh man,
so it's kind of hit and miss.
It is. To compare Arondir and Galadriel, like, so Galadriel definitely was a one-dimensional character until the end, like you said. But I think the actress definitely had a little bit. She had the range to be not the range, but her dialogue and kind of her story gave her a little bit more to flesh out the range. So we had different emotional beats that Arondir really didn't have, and I completely agree with you. I don't think that was the actor at all. But after a while, I just kind of was like, I don't care as much about you because I'm just getting this kind of very level, feeling from you, and you're not hating this. Where Galadriel had those moments of despair and moments of elation and quiet moments, where Arondir didn't really hit that. But again, I agree with you. I don't think it's the actor. I think it's definitely the script.
And I think that's hard to separate sometimes. Is what is the actor? What is this an acting flaw, or is this just not great writing? And I would lean towards writing a lot of this. And it's not a dialogue thing. Like I didn't have these big complaints about the dialogue in the show. No. It was more characters going from, point A to B to C to D, and there wasn't a whole lot of peak and valley. It was just, like you said, Arondir is, for too long, for too far into the season, first season, is he this just kind of stoic thing. Until the very end, they start to kind of give him more reasons for having empathy. But I'll tell you, the scene stealer, really the season 1 stealer, is Joseph Mawle as Adar. And unfortunately, he's not going to be back. He played Benjen Stark in Game of Thrones.
Oh, that's right.
He steals every scene he's in the first season of Rings of Power. And for whatever reason, I just think he's going to play the character's a smaller role. And so he opted not to come back, which is a huge loss. But I think they felt like it would steal too much thunder from Sauron. Now that Sauron is revealed, he's going to be the main baddie. Adar was kind of the baddie that carried the first season, and Mawle was a force in that role. So hopefully see more stuff with him outside of this, but I'm going to miss that character. Really interesting. Probably the most interesting character by far in the first season of Rings of Power.
Yeah, definitely. Because, they definitely built it more along the lines of him caring about, as opposed to just wanton destruction and power. And so that was a nice kind of dichotomy from, the typical Sauron or something else where it's like, I want power, I want to rule. And he was more like, I feel like, like these are my kids. These are my, I'm responsible for them and I want them to be taken care of, kind of a situation. So,
right.
Now going into the visuals, I thought I was really happy with the visuals in the show. I liked the color. I know you talked, a little bit about a little was cleaner than the other ones. I do feel I was also okay because it is definitely much more of a time of peace. outside of Galadriel kind of going crazy, everywhere, and then the Southlands kind of being kept down, I was fine with everything being a little bit cleaner, everything looking a little bit nicer because, you were in a time of peace and prosperity kind of a situation. So,
Right.
but I did like a lot of the color that was happening, and I really felt like it was obviously a stark difference from Game of Thrones or some of these like others that are very muted colors, very
Right.
browns
Yeah.
and
It's a
grays and
show
black.
certainly not afraid of its color palette, which if you'll notice a lot of streaming shows now, heavens, they might as well be black and white because I swear they've pulled so much color out of a lot of these shows, and I don't understand it. And admittedly, I'm not a colorist, but I do have color correction background from in video and short films and some independent features and stuff where I carried the colorist title, but that's not what I do now. But so I've got that perspective, and it drives me nuts. They pull the color out of these shows. And so very refreshing in Rings of Power to have nice saturation and really good skin tones, and everything felt vibrant and alive. And I think maybe my big complaint with it looking pristine is the reality that they did shoot a lot of this on stages, and I can kind of tell. And that has a tendency sometimes to look too clean. Mm-hmm. Whereas, the original trilogy, Lord of the Rings, that was almost all on location. Even the big sets they built were outside. And it had a dirtier look. So, a very good looking show, which I don't understand. I've heard people complain about the way Rings of Power looks, that they don't think it's a good looking show, and that the special effects weren't. I guess I don't see it. I think it was one of the best looking streaming series of last year. Along with Andor, but it's a very different. It's a different aesthetic, though. For fantasy, that I thought they nailed the way things look. I had no complaints with that.
No. So it was definitely my favorite shot fantasy over the last couple of years. With like I said, with Wheel of Time, with House of Dragons, and even going back to Game of Thrones, it definitely I like the look of it a lot better than the others. Yeah, no,
it looks great no matter what you're playing it back on. I mean, I watched Rings of Power on my 4K TV upstairs, and then I've got a HD projector downstairs that I watched most of it on. It looked fantastic no matter what I played it back on. And I can't always say that. There's some episodes of Game of Thrones I can't see the picture. They've graded it so dark that I can't tell what's going on. It just looks like a muddy mess on my television, and people are talking. So I'm a little more sensitive to that than most. Well, I think our time clock is rapidly approaching. Any final thoughts on Rings of Power?
I'm actually excited for season 2. So, again, while I didn't read a lot of the books, I do really like fantasy series. I've watched most of them, gotten through most of them, even if it's a slog. But I do think with the last couple episodes of kind of where they're going, I'm excited to see where they take it here. Hopefully they kind of learn of stop doing some of the world building, a little more action, a little bit slower, or not get rid of some of that slow parts.
Yeah,
but I think it's gonna be good. I think we're gonna look back on this series after it's all said and done and think it was good. I think it was a good, good overall.
Yeah, I think admittedly that the creators would admit that they didn't meet expectation with season 1, and unfortunately they did lose a lot of people to it. But I think people will forgive it if a second season comes bursting out of the gate and they fix a lot of the issues, which I feel confident that they will. I really do. I think it'll be a season of fixes, and I'm not talking about fan service. I'm just talking about story structure, pacing, that they're going to realize, hey, we can move this thing along quicker than we did season 1, and people will be able to follow what's going on. And I do. I'm confident season 2 will be very, very good.
Yeah,
I really am. I just call it gut instinct, what you will. I think it's going to be really, really solid. So I'm looking forward to it too. Well, thanks again for tuning in to Cinema A to B. We will catch you on the next episode.
Awesome.